The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 701. What's going on? Konta Yasuda answered the phone, clearly annoyed at being disturbed. Aida Misa put the phone on speaker and said, Mr. Yasuda, Kiran York is starting to develop Dragonsmount now. Damn it, Yasuda cursed. What gives him the right? He says Dragonsmount is a construction site owned by the York family meant for building a hospital. That's nonsense. Lindsay Ludwig interjected. Konta Yasuda, I can vouch for that. I promised when I bought Dragonsmount. Lindsay Ludwig? Yasuda asked. That's me. That was your promise. It has nothing to do with me, Yasuda declared authoritatively. Onyx Kirkland, start the construction. Kiran commanded from the other end. Damn it! Yasuda cursed again. The sound of construction machinery starting roared in the background. Damn it! Yasuda swore once more, but the noise drowned out his voice. Seeing Kiran's assertiveness, Aida Misa felt delighted inside but pretended to be anxious. Mr. Yasuda, what should we do? Stop them! We must stop them! Yasuda shouted over the phone. Just me alone. How can I stop them? Aida Misa feigned a crying voice. On the other end, Yasuda was even more infuriated and helpless. Aida Misa nodded to Kiran, signaling him to continue. Kiran turned to Lindsay. Lindsay Ludwig, I asked you to build the hospital in 7 days. You failed, and now I want you to compensate me 10 billion. Lindsay immediately understood that it was about getting money from Yasuda Corporation and argued, it wasn't my fault. When I sold Dragonsmount to Yasuda Corporation, I specified in the contract that they were responsible for the construction, and it was also supposed to be done in 7 days. Really? I wasn't aware of that. Aida Misa pretended to be clueless. On the other end, Yasuda felt ignored and burst out, Damn! What is this mess? Mr. Yasuda, it was Lord Farron who signed the contract. I wasn't qualified to see it. I know nothing about it. Aida Misa feigned confusion. Don't listen to them! You can't touch Dragonsmount! What gives you the right to say we can't touch Dragonsmount? Kiran scoffed defiantly. From now on, nobody but the York family can develop Dragonsmount, or else what? Yasuda was enraged by the threat. Death! Snap! Kiran swiftly knocked the phone from Aida Misa's hand to the ground, his face cold and domineering. Aida Misa looked at Kiran, almost ready to kneel in admiration. His acting was too real, too dominant. Lindsay's eyes also sparkled with admiration and love. Yasuda, on the other side, was frustrated. The phone beeped annoyingly and he was anxious but unable to get through. Now he couldn't vent his anger and began to worry more since Aida Misa was alone in Dragon's Land and they couldn't handle Dragonsmount. Kiran was too assertive, too ruthless. Yasuda pondered for a moment and then made a call. The person on the other line immediately agreed to send someone to Dragon's Land. Kiran left the construction to Onyx and walked away. Aida Misa knew the conflict had escalated, and having fulfilled her role, she followed suit. Lindsay quickly caught up with Kiran and got into the car with him. As she buckled her seatbelt, she looked at Kiran and asked, Did you handle Aida Misa? She listened to me. Handled her? Lindsay playfully emphasized the first word with a wink. Nonsense. Seriously, Aida Misa's eyes were all starry and admiring. She truly loves you. Anything else? Kiran asked dryly. And I'm jealous. Can you even be? Kiran looked forward. It should be my wife who gets jealous. I'm your woman. Of course, I get jealous. Stop being narcissistic. Where's the narcissism? It's you who loves me. Crazy. Not at all. Yesterday you said you'd smash her butt and you haven't yet. Lindsay flirted, her eyes full of seductive charm. You're eager? Kiran scoffed. Come on. Lindsay then leaned her upper body towards the car door, positioning herself for Kiran to act. Kiran looked over and immediately turned his head away, thinking this woman is crazy. To tempt him, she really went all out. He internally cursed the lingerie manufacturers. Would using a bit more fabric really kill them? Seeing Kiran hadn't acted, Lindsay became somewhat anxious, urging, Hurry up! Hurry your sister! Were you and my sister Yvonne Quinn fast together? Lindsay curiously probed. Kiran was utterly defeated. When are you leaving Bayville? Hate me now? Lindsay sat up straight, her eyes watery and affectionate. Anyway, wherever you go, I'll follow. I'm going to my wife. Kiran stopped the car and asked Lindsay to get out. Lindsay leaned back in the seat. Go ahead, kick me out. You. Kiran was completely speechless at Lindsay's cheekiness, just managing to restrain himself. Kiran, seeing you like this, I'm really growing fonder of you, Lindsay said as she lightly flicked her hair and looked at him earnestly. I've realized now that when a woman falls for a man, she needs to be shamelessly persistent. Kiran turned to look out the window, thinking she was mad. Regardless of what you are, I can't forget the feelings you've brought me. If you really can't be with a woman, I could undergo artificial insemination for you. Stop dreaming, Kiran coldly rejected. If you can't do that, how about you give me an injection every month? Lindsay's cheeks reddened, and she clenched her legs together, leaning forcefully back in her seat, obviously reminiscing about the sensation that injection had given her. Kiran thought to himself, the woman is addicted. He wished he could slap himself for letting her experience that. All right, enough teasing. Lindsay's tone changed. Where to? Kiran finally breathed a sigh of relief. Take me back to the Bayville Hotel. Kiran started the car and drove her back. Upon reaching the hotel parking, Lindsay turned to Kiran with a flirtatious smile and asked, Do you know why I came back? Why? Kiran asked curiously. Silly! To change clothes! Lindsay's cheeks reddened as she chided him playfully. Kiran frowned, puzzled. Lindsay hurried out of the car, and seeing no one around, she ran into the lobby. Kiran looked up to see that Lindsay's skirt had changed color. It appeared wet, but only in a certain spot. Chapter 702. In Sawyer Sinfield's room, after Kiran York finished examining the three of them, he frowned slightly, noticing that everything was still the same as before. 567 young Master York, they're actually not in a state of illness, the healing prince ventured cautiously. You notice too? Kiran raised an eyebrow in inquiry. The healing prince nodded. If I'm not mistaken, their bodies seem to have entered a new state of growth and development, much like the growth of a newborn. Kiran was surprised. He had realized they were not ill, but he hadn't expected this. Go on, he urged. I visited the Maui tribe years ago and heard about a type of goo called Immortal Silkworm goo. Immortal Silkworm goo? Kiran echoed. The healing prince nodded. Yes, the Immortal Silkworm goo. Tell me more. I haven't actually seen it, but I've heard that this goo has a peculiar feature. It allows a person to continually grow and die in cycles, yet somehow remain immortal. The healing prince glanced at Sawyer Sinfield's family. He continued, I've been taking their pulses daily and noticed that their bodily fluctuations correspond to different stages each day, changing with the sun. So, I think it's very likely that it's this legendary immortal silkworm goo. If it is this immortal silkworm goo, how can they be awakened? Kiran asked, full of curiosity. Back then, no one really knew. It was just legend, the healing prince said seriously. Then frowned. Do you think it might be like a caterpillar transforming into a butterfly? Kiran's brow furrowed and he fell into thought. Young Master York, this is just a hypothesis. It might not be correct, the healing prince quickly clarified. It's fine whether it's right or wrong, we're just brainstorming here. Kiran wasn't dismissive. Thank you for acknowledging that, young Master York. Kiran nodded. Keep an eye on these changes and try to find the cause. Of course, young Master York. The healing prince was pleased, feeling he had finally done something praiseworthy in Kiran's eyes. After leaving, Kiran arranged for Faber Luther to go to Dragonsmount to secretly monitor Marcus Leo and others to protect Dragonsmount. Faber immediately set off. Kiran also instructed Father Larson to create some mysterious events on Dragonsmount and to construct a formation that would increase the yang energy of the place. He hoped that by doing so, the yang energy would enter the dragon's veins and purify the pollution from the Maui tribe's blood cave. Seeing everyone busy and having nothing to do, Joe Queen became anxious. Young Master York, what should I do? Having gotten to know Joe Queen better, Kiran knew he was proud. I have an important task for you. Joe's face lit up with joy. Thank you, young Master York. Organize some people in Bayville and open some bars and similar places. Young Master York, are you sure? Joe was puzzled. Such businesses were always considered disreputable. The Yasuda Corporation from Sunland will definitely come to Bayville soon, and these hotels and bars will become some of their key activity spots. Onyx Kirkland is my man. It's best if he doesn't show his face, best if you take the lead, Kiran explained. Joe was delighted. Thank you, young Master York. Kiran nodded and reminded him not to engage in bad deeds before sending Joe off to implement the plan. After wrapping up, Kiran went to Yvonne Quinn's office. Pushing the door open, he saw Yvonne dressed in a black semi-transparent dress, her skin gleaming through, making her look enchantingly beautiful. However, her beautiful oval face was pale, as if she was trembling with cold. Kiran was somewhat helpless. This woman was obviously trying to seduce him by dressing this way, and her naturally cold constitution made her miserably cold. Looking at her beautiful face, he asked, displeased, "Don't you want to live?" Yvonne didn't speak, but moved her long legs wrapped in black stockings and swayed her slender waist without an ounce of extra flesh towards Kiran like a willow bending in the wind, radiantly tender and irresistibly seductive. Kiran was not moved, he was just helpless. Stepping forward, he held her, placed a hand on her back and channeled internal force into her body, which made her more comfortable and brought some color back to her face. You don't need to seduce me like this. But my sister seduces you, aren't you happy about that? Yvonne's watery eyes filled with resentment and complexity. When did I get seduced? You didn't hit her. You weren't harsh to her. That means you were seduced. Kiran was speechless. What exactly is the goo poison affecting Sawyer Sinfield and his wife? I won't tell you, Yvonne playfully pouted. What is Immortal Silkworm goo? Kiran continued to ask. I won't tell you. Kiran was displeased with her continued petulance and thought about letting go. Don't you dare leave. Yvonne wrapped her arms tightly around Kiran's neck, pressing her body against his, her face a complex mix of shyness and allure. Kiran said helplessly, I don't have time for romance now. Are you going to tell me or not? Don't tell. Go ahead and spank me. Yvonne boldly flipped over, presenting her back to Kiran. Kiran was utterly defeated. Yvonne Quinn, let me tell you, if the Sinfields die, it's the end for me, you, and Lilian Yanes. I'm not afraid. Yvonne turned her head and smiled at Kiran. You love Snowzander, not me. If we die together, I'd actually be happy. Crazy woman. Kiran stood up, about to set Yvonne down. Yvonne suddenly laughed, giving Kiran a flirtatious look. Silly man. Why don't you examine my body? Your body? Kiran was stunned. If you properly examine my body, wouldn't you know? Kiran was taken aback, looking at Yvonne. Yvonne hooked her arms around Kiran's neck, her face wearing a seductive smile. Kiss me, and I'll tell you what Immortal Silkworm goo is. Kiss you? Kiran looked down at Yvonne, her lips painted a blazing red, shining brightly, incredibly tempting, making one really want to kiss her. However, he did not actually kiss her. Instead, he placed his hand on her body. Yvonne initially looked seductive, but soon her eyes closed tightly, her face showing a mix of confusion and pleasure. When did your body get poisoned with goo? Kiran asked as the memory of Fiona Sinfield's crypt with life and death goo echoed. Did you plant the life and death goo? I thought it was life and death goo at first, but it turned out to be a hybrid of life and death goo and Immortal Silkworm goo. What does that mean? Kiran asked curiously. Kiss me, will you? Yvonne didn't tell but asked sweetly. Kiran's gaze fell on Yvonne's blushing cheeks. Chapter 703. Yvonne Quinn was the epitome of temptation, with skin whiter than snow and dark eyes as deep as ink. Her long eyelashes fluttered like the wings of a butterfly, while her delicate nose and slightly parted red lips breathed seduction. The fragile elegance of her delicate body inspired pity, marking her as a true siren in the flesh. Kiran York felt his heart stir, but he resisted, lowering his eyes. Instead, he looked ahead and said calmly, Speak. Disappointment flickered across Yvonne's face, but she quickly recovered. Snowzander is really lucky to have a man who truly loves her like you do. Kiran didn't respond, recognizing the sadness in Yvonne's expression. Any reply would only deepen her sorrow. His love belonged only to Snowzander now. The Immortal Silkworm goo is made by putting silkworms together until they attack each other. The last remaining silkworm becomes the goo silkworm. This process is the same as with other goo. Yvonne paused briefly. The unique aspect of it is that it can continually undergo self-death and rebirth, just like the characteristics of a silkworm. The brain zombie goo involves consuming human brain matter, ultimately causing death and turning the victim into a zombie controlled by the goo. The person who originally infected us with a love spell indeed intended to kill us, using this method. But it appears that Fiona Sinfield also implanted the Immortal Silkworm goo, which causes the brain zombie goo to continually resurrect during its consumption process, thus ensuring our safety cyclically. Are you saying that Lilian Yanes and I also have the Immortal Silkworm goo inside us? Kiran asked urgently. I'm not sure about that, but I think not. Yvonne frowned as she spoke. Not? Kiran sought confirmation. Yvonne nodded. You likely use the life and death goo to counteract the brain zombie goo. And what about the Immortal Silkworm goo? That goo is being used to protect Sawyer Sinfield. To protect him? Kiran asked quickly. Yvonne nodded. The source of our brain zombie goo is within Sawyer Sinfield's body, so his survival ensures ours. What? Kiran was shocked. At the time, Fiona Sinfield must have realized that Sawyer Sinfield, being a normal human, could not be restrained by the life and death goo without risking his death, which would doom us all. Kiran gasped in realization. She used the Immortal Silkworm goo to control the goo poison within Sawyer Sinfield's body, thereby allowing him to live safely unnoticed, which worked out well for everyone. What's the current situation with the Sinfield family, then? I suspect that over the years, the brain zombie goo has adapted to his body, and through various means, it has spread to his wife and daughter, leading to their current state. What can be done about it? Kiran asked urgently. There are two methods. One is to pretend we don't know and let them continue in this unconscious state, Yvonne finished, looking at Kiran. Kiran shook his head immediately. That won't do. Then there's the second method. What is it? Remove both the brain zombie goo and the Immortal Silkworm goo. That way, we're all safe, and our fates are in our hands. Remove them, Kiran muttered. Yes, I've now implanted both the life and death goo and the immortal silkworm goo. Removing the gi for me would be unbearable. Yvonne stopped and looked at Kiran. Are you suggesting we transfer it to Lilian? Yvonne lowered her head, silently consenting. Kiran's mind swirled with complexity. Could there be any repercussions? I don't know, Yvonne looked at Kiran. There's also something else you need to consider. What's that? Kiran asked. What about his wife and daughter if we remove it from Sawyer Sinfield? Can it also be removed from them? I don't know. Yvonne voiced her concerns. Are we just going to be stuck like this? It's not about being stuck. It's about many people's lives. Besides, if you die, the York family will have no descendants, and you'd regret it too late. Kiran took a deep breath, lost in thought. Yvonne's words were painfully accurate. The current situation is about balancing caution with risk. If we're cautious, we can all survive. If we take a risk and it's not well thought out, we could all lose. Yvonne looked at Kiran. I know you've always been suspicious of my identity, and you're very wary of me, but now you need to understand that we're inseparable with no way out. If I live, you live. If I die, you won't fare well either. Looking towards the door, I'm more anxious about the Sinfield situation than you are. I'm also trying to cultivate the Giyu to see how I can control the brain zombie goo and break this situation. After speaking, Yvonne wrapped her arms around Kiran's waist, burying her head in his midsection, her tears flowing uncontrollably. I've had a harder life than you, knowing you, loving you for so many years, getting nothing in return, still being doubted by you. Sob. Listening to Yvonne's crying, Kiran felt an inexplicable pain in his heart. Yvonne truly had it tough. I understand now. Wait for me. I'll go ask Lilian if she has a solution. Go ahead. Yvonne didn't stop him and let go of Kiran, but the disappointment was in her eyes. Her dress, her ambiguity, her tears, none of it had sparked even a flicker of desire in Kiran. Was she really worth so little? Kiran didn't dwell on her feelings and stood up to find Lilian. Yvonne's intention was clear. Transferring the GU into Lilian was the best outcome. But what would the results be? He didn't know and dared not experiment lightly. When Kiran arrived at Neptune's Cove Karaoke, he could hear the Joyful Odyssey from afar, still touching and thrilling as always, but Kiran was feeling oppressed at that moment. The duty of protecting Dragonsmount had silently fallen on his shoulders, yet his own life was not under his control, which was truly frustrating. Kiran entered and went upstairs to Lilian's room. Lilian stopped playing, frowning slightly. Remember to knock next time. You were playing. I knew it wouldn't be inconvenient, so I came in. Interrupting my playing is inconvenient. Kiran, feeling helpless. I'll be mindful next time. Apologize this time. Sorry. I don't want just a verbal apology. What do you want? Kiran was curious. Sit here and play the Joyful Odyssey for me. Stop when I'm satisfied, Lilian commanded. Kiran, what did that mean? He was about to try to reason with her. Lilian had already stood up, sat on the adjacent sofa, gently closed her eyes, and waited expectantly for Kiran to play. Kiran looked at Lilian's beautiful face, suddenly feeling an unusual stir in his heart. Chapter 704. Lilian's features seemed to have been meticulously sculpted, flawless in their perfection. Draped in a flowing white dress, she carried herself with a regal grace reminiscent of a saint descending from Mount Everest, inspiring reverence and an untouchable sanctity in those who beheld her. A woman like this was enough for a lifetime. Having a wife like this, one could die without regrets. These thoughts stirred a deep and powerful emotion in Kiran, especially considering the troublesome immortal silkworm goo and brain zombie goo within Sawyer Sinfield's body, which ignited a formidable aura within him. The strum of the harp resonated, carrying a profound sentiment. Even Lilian couldn't help but look up, feeling as if the melody of the Joyful Odyssey had reached a new realm. Kiran's fingers quickened, and the music flowed like a continuous stream of mountain spring water, cascading down from the heights with relentless vigor. A silent love meandered within the melody, weaving through the air and touching hearts, moving emotions profoundly. Lilian's own feelings of love and affection seemed to be stirred, evoking a bittersweet urge to cherish, even to the point of tears. The first layer, love, flows naturally. True to its name, love was flowing freely. Lilian was completely captivated. Soon, the melody progressed to the second layer, dreaming a scene, and then to the third layer, love in this world. Eventually, it reached the fourth layer, love and resentment. At this point, Kiran's emotions began to deeply immerse in the music, with visions of the Wolf Gate, Panther Gate, and Lion Gate, as well as the loyalty of the Xander family, Mrs. Wilson, Rainfrost, and Onyx Kirkland. Visions of women who loved him. Lilian, Snow Xander, Yvonne Quinn touched a tender spot in his heart, urging him to give in to these overwhelming feelings. Yet, such surrender was unacceptable and unachievable for him. A surge of domineering energy that could swallow mountains and rivers suddenly filled him, and his fingers vibrated the harp strings, producing a sound akin to a dragon's roar. Tears began to streak down Lilian's beautiful oval face, her almond eyes unknowingly shedding crystal-clear tears. The final 3 notes resonated, and the entire room, even the whole universe, seemed to shift, erasing all grievances and bringing utter tranquility to all hearts. Overcome, Lilian couldn't help but cry out, rushing to embrace Kiran from behind. Her body pressed against his without reservation. No distance or ambiguity between them, only genuine feelings and perhaps even true love. At this moment, Lilian saw a different Kiran. At this moment, her heart accepted a new Kiran. Lilian's defenses were broken at this moment, and she truly wanted to be with Kiran. More importantly, Lilian had always thought she had reached the 5th layer of her cultivation beyond hate and wanted to advance to the 6th layer, unfettered transformation, to become carefree. However, she had never understood how, nor could she advance further. Having heard Kiran play the 4th layer of love and resentment, she realized that her foundation in the 4th layer was unstable. Her cultivation of the 5th layer was fortunate not to be too deep, preventing her from recklessly advancing to the 6th layer, which would have led her into madness. Upon reflection, how could one relax without resolving past grievances? How could one be free of regrets? Her mistakes were truly tragic. Kiran grasped Lilian's hand, holding it gently as though it were jade. He harbored no lewd intentions or desires, only feelings of happiness and emotion. "Sister Lilian, thank you. Thank me? I should be thanking you," Lilian responded, realizing her body was pressed against Kiran's back. She wanted to pull away, but Kiran didn't release her hand. He wasn't taking advantage, but he had something important to clarify. "Sister Lilian, there's something I need to tell you." Lilian's emotions stabilized, and she nodded slightly. "Go on. The immortal Silkworm goo is indeed within Sawyer Sinfield, and he is also the source of our brain zombie goo and love spell. So he is extremely important," Kiran explained, looking at Lilian expectantly, wanting to see her reaction. Kiran was disappointed because Lilian appeared very calm, as if the news hadn't affected her at all. "Aren't you concerned about this news?" Kiran couldn't help but ask out of curiosity. Lilian shook her head, her tone tinged with sadness. "I knew about this." "You knew?" Kiran was shocked, releasing her hand and turning to face her. "Your mother told me years ago." "She told you?" Kiran was again astounded. Lilian nodded. "She told me." "What exactly happened?" Kiran pressed for details. Lilian paused before explaining. "Actually, the root of this matter is your mother's fear that I wouldn't agree to marry you, so she had us infected with this love spell." "This?" Kiran felt overwhelmed, staring at Lilian. Her expression was exceedingly calm, but the mix of the brain zombie goo and the dual female love spell was something she hadn't anticipated, nor had Fiona Sinfield. "What about Yvonne Quinn?" Kiran inquired. "I don't know about her, but I knew there was a love spell between us two." "I wasn't aware of Yvonne Quinn," Lilian said, her expression slightly dimming. "So, someone did this intentionally." Kiran looked at Lilian. "Could it have been Sawyer Sinfield?" "I'm not sure." Lilian paused, then added, "But I think Sawyer Sinfield might know something about this. My mother didn't know. She hoped you'd marry me. Fiona Sinfield probably helped my mother, so by deduction the origin must be with Sawyer Sinfield. He might have had the idea," Kiran said confidently. "It's not entirely so," Lilian shook her head. "Why not? At least Sawyer Sinfield didn't want to harm you. If he had wanted to, both you and I would be dead by now." Lilian's tone, though thoughtful, was very rational. Kiran recalled the will in Sawyer Sinfield's safe. Indeed, he hadn't intended to harm him. Could there be a hidden enemy behind this? Someone who deliberately manipulated this situation? Lilian nodded slightly. "That's the only explanation. Who could it be? Kiran asked urgently. "If I knew, wouldn't I have dealt with it by now?" Lilian gave Kiran a look. Kiran realized his question was somewhat naive, his voice filled with concern. "Then we can't keep the goo source inside Sawyer Sinfield. That would be very dangerous." "Not keep it there, keep it inside me?" Lilian's eyebrows furrowed. Kiran was silent. "Do you know what the consequences would be if it were inside me?" Lilian's tone was icy cold. Chapter 705. Upon being questioned, Kiran York fell silent. As a doctor, he had some understanding of goo poison. Considering Yvonne Quinn's physical condition, he couldn't help but worry if Lilian's body might also. The thought tied his stomach in knots. Seeing Kiran's silence, Lilian turned her gaze out the window, her disappointment palpable. "In this life, you and I were never meant to part," Kiran said, looking at Lilian. "However, we can live as individuals. You can go love Snowzander," Lilian replied without turning around. "Sister Lilian, do you hate my mother?" Kiran suddenly asked. "No hate," Lilian answered naturally. So, deep down, you actually like me? Kiran ventured. What are you on about? Lilian's face turned red, her expression flustered. I want to be with you, Kiran declared earnestly. What about Snow Xander? Lilian instinctively asked. I want her too, Kiran said firmly. Dream on. Lilian scoffed dismissively. I know that keeping it within you means we can never truly part, but you wouldn't want to see my life threatened, Kiran continued. Your life or death is none of my concern, Lilian feigned indifference. If you really didn't care about my life or death, why would you force me to practice the Joyful Odyssey? Why beat me up? Just get lost. I'm annoyed, Lilian snapped back, unsettled by the conversation. You're annoyed because you love me. Believe it or not, I'll beat you to death, Lilian threatened, raising her hand. Go ahead. Kiran didn't move but spoke calmly. You, Lilian faltered. I'm not doing this for myself? Kiran's voice grew intense as he looked deeply at Lilian. You need to understand. I'm now responsible for protecting Dragonsmount and the dragon vein so I can't die. Kiran laughed ruefully. Given my current situation, I can't even be with Snow, nor can I share a bed with you or Yvonne. Having a woman or not makes no difference to me. Lilian fell silent, her expression subtly changing. What I truly want is to be able to control my own fate, protect Dragonsmount and the dragon vein, and identify the enemy behind all this. Kiran finished speaking and gazed at Lilian, his eyes filled with hope. Lilian's body trembled slightly. Kiran wasn't driven by desire, but by responsibility, which moved her. Sister Lilian, Kiran called softly. I'll think about it. Lilian didn't reject him this time. Thank you, Sister Lilian, Kiran said before leaving. Lilian was left conflicted. Once the source of the brain zombie goo entered her body, she could end Kiran's life with a mere thought. Of course, she wouldn't kill him now, which meant she might eventually fall in love with him over time. What should she do? She was torn. More importantly, she found she couldn't bring herself to hate Kiran. If she couldn't hate, it was easy to fall in love. As Kiran left, he knew he had to inform Snow Xander about everything. He couldn't betray her. He rushed back to the Xander Corporation. Entering Snow's office, she was reviewing documents. Seeing Kiran, she brightened and immediately stood up. Her curvy body, clad in a standard office lady uniform, dazzled him. Husband! She exclaimed, throwing her arms open and rushing towards him. Kiran watched Snow's graceful, curvy figure, his heart filling with affection. He embraced her and boldly kissed her on her glowing red lips. Snow responded passionately, her fair, delicate skin flushing with color, her figure elegant and enticing. Wifey, I'm sorry, Kiran said as he playfully patted her bum. Seeing Kiran taking liberties, Snow didn't scold him. Instead, her breathing changed slightly, and her legs in black stockings trembled, adding a hidden allure. Her face broke into a charming smile. Doing something naughty? Aware of the jest, Kiran shook his head with a wry smile, looking at his charming and rhythmic wife. I confessed to Lilian. Did she accept? Snow screamed in surprise, her eyes tender as she looked at Kiran. Kiran was taken aback. Aren't you jealous? As long as you love me, why should I be jealous? Snow wrapped her arms around Kiran's neck, leaning back slightly. I know there must be a reason. Thank you for understanding. Kiran hugged her tightly, moved by her acceptance. Snow's face was radiant with joy, yet she didn't ask why. Here's what's happening. Kiran explained the current situation and the existence of the love goo between him and Lilian. Snow listened, her almond eyes blinking non-stop, then she laughed, looking at Kiran. Are you thanking your mother? Kiran shook his head. Not at all. Why not? She found you a beautiful wife. I think a wife like you, tangible and touchable, is what's real. Kiran paused. I'm not looking for a vase to decorate my home. Snow chuckled, playfully striking Kiran's chest, pretending to be annoyed. What do you mean? Are you saying I'm not as pretty as Lilian? It's not about looks, it's about being together in heart and spirit. Oh, please. You're just feeling inferior. Snow teased with a smile. I bet you can't even touch Lilian once. Kiran pouted. How can that be? I held her hand today. Husband, you're amazing. Snow exaggerated her expression. Hey, aren't you jealous? Kiran was puzzled by Snow's reaction. Fool! Snow's tone shifted. What use is my jealousy if you can't live? Kiran fell silent. I'm already content knowing you love me deeply in this situation. Snow gently cradled Kiran's face. I know behind your cold exterior lies loneliness, helplessness, and unspoken sorrow. It pains me that I can't help you. You're the fool. Kiran embraced her tighter. I'm a man. It's my burden to bear. Wife, I suggest you take in Yvonne Quinn as well, Snow said softly and affectionately. Her? Kiran's face showed his conflict. Given the current situation, you're bound together by life and death. You can't plant a bomb for yourself, can you? Snow's tone became slightly grave, but she quickly turned mischievous. Anyway, even if you have 1,000, 10,000 women, you can't touch them. You still have to sleep in my bed. Seeing Snow acting like a naughty girl, Kiran was moved. Thank you, wife. Snow leaned in and kissed Kiran on the lips. After a long while, she parted. Don't thank me in the future. Kiran looked at the assertive Snow and fell silent. He decided not to dwell on his feelings and focus on confronting the enemy. I'm going to find Yvonne. Snow nodded. Kiran hurried to the Bayville Hotel. At this moment, a car was heading towards the Bayville Hotel, targeting the Sinfield family. Chapter. When the car stopped, 4 men got out and entered the hotel. 1 went to register for a room, while 3 pretended to use the restroom but headed upstairs instead. They were at the door of Sawyer Sinfield's room in a blink. The 3 exchanged glances and nodded slightly. 1 lifted his leg and kicked the door open with a bang. Inside, the healing elder was monitoring the physical changes in the Sinfield family, trying to discern a pattern. Seeing the 3 men burst in, he immediately realized something was wrong and anxiously asked, "Who are you?" As he spoke, he threw a handful of poison powder. However, the men seemed unbothered and rushed to kidnap the targets. The healing elder was closest to Aurora Sinfield and immediately tried to block them physically. Meanwhile, the other 2 men had already picked up Sawyer Sinfield and his wife and were running out. The healing elder tried to pursue but was blocked by the man attempting to kidnap Aurora, almost losing her in the process. "Retreat!" shouted the 2 at the door, looking back. The man who failed to kidnap Aurora turned and fled. The healing elder hesitated to follow, worried it was a trap, and quickly called Kiran. On his way elsewhere, Kiran saw the call and worried that Sawyer Sinfield's condition had worsened. He answered immediately, "What's the matter?" "Master, someone has taken Mr. and Mrs. Sinfield." "What?" "I only managed to save Aurora," the healing elder expressed his guilt. "I'm coming. Keep her safe." Kiran hung up and sped up, pressing the gas pedal hard. Meanwhile, the 4 kidnappers had already put the Sinfields in a car and were hastily driving away. Hearing the commotion, Yvonne Quinn came downstairs and asked, "What happened?" 4 people came in and kidnapped them. The healing elder replied, guilt-ridden. "I'll check the surveillance footage," Yvonne said, turning to leave. Within 5 minutes, Kiran arrived. "Aster York, it's my fault." Kiran smelled the poison in the air. The attackers weren't affected, indicating they were highly skilled. "You managed to protect Aurora. That's commendable." "Master," the healing elder still felt responsible. "They've disappeared," Yvonne returned, checking her phone's playback. "Let me see." Kiran took the phone, shocked by the kidnapper's abilities, comparing one to Faber Luther's skill. "What do we do?" asked the healing elder urgently. "Secure Aurora while I figure this out," Kiran instructed. Understood. Kiran and Yvonne left to go to her room as he called Lilian. "What's wrong?" Lilian's voice was icy. "Somebody has kidnapped the Sinfields." "When did this happen?" Lilian's voice rose with urgency. "Just now, the healing elder managed to save only Aurora." "Damn it," Lilian cursed. "Wait for me." Hanging up, Kiran knew from Lilian's cursing that the situation was severe. This must be someone aware of the goo poison. Worried, hence the abduction, Yvonne theorized. Someone who knows about goo poison, and these events likely has ties to Maui and might be behind the initial setup, Kiran speculated gravely. "What should we do?" Yvonne inquired. "They didn't kill them. They want to use us. No need to panic." Kiran reasoned that since the attackers didn't kill on the spot, there was less immediate danger. Yvonne nodded in understanding. A quarter hour later, Lilian arrived at Yvonne's office. Seeing Kiran still composed, she frowned. "What's happening?" "They probably want to use us, so they took the Sinfields," Kiran explained. "Wait for their demands?" "That's the plan," Kiran reassured. "As long as they don't threaten our lives, there's no need to worry." Lilian nodded silently. "Then why call me?" Yvonne looked curious. "To inform you, and I want to marry both of you," Kiran stated flatly. "Marry us?" Yvonne was surprised. Lilian's face turned pale with anger. "Dream on." "I'm just letting you know." Kiran admitted defeat but persisted stubbornly. "Ridiculous." Lilian turned to leave. "Sister Lilian, can we place the goo source inside you now?" Kiran asked urgently. "Sawyer Sinfield is gone, how?" Lilian responded irritably. "The goo source is actually in Aurora today," Kiran revealed. "What?" Both Lilian and Yvonne exclaimed, shocked. "That's wrong. It should be in Sawyer Sinfield," Yvonne protested. "The source moves among the 3. It's in Aurora right now." Kiran looked at Lilian. "Sister Lilian, if we don't extract it now, we'll really be at their mercy." "You." Lilian's face was cold with anger, understanding the implications. "If we don't act now, our future will be even harder," Kiran said firmly. Sister Lilian, I can't carry it anymore, Yvonne interjected. Sister Lilian, your martial skills are superior. If it's in you, you're safe and so are we all, Kiran pleaded. You scoundrel. Lilian was furious yet conflicted. Thank you, Sister Lilian. Seeing a chance, Kiran quickly thanked her. Now let's hurry, Yvonne suggested. Lilian, though reluctant, did not object. Kiran breathed a sigh of relief, finally hopeful. He took Lilian's hand, and they hurried to Aurora's room. Upon entering, they saw the healing elder busy. Master, hurry, there's a situation, the healing elder exclaimed as Kiran's eyes narrowed fiercely on Aurora. The enemy knows about goo poison and wants the source. Lilian quickly approached, raised her hand, and Aurora sat up. Lilian sat opposite her. Kiran, hurry. Her lips approached Aurora's mouth. Chapter. As Lilian Yanes' lips touched Aurora Sinfield's, Kiran York quickly approached, placing several silver needles on Aurora's body and channeling his internal force into her. Aurora's complexion rapidly changed, turning white as paper, then red as burning charcoal, and finally black as ink. Yvonne Quinn, standing by, also showed a changing expression, reflecting a complex pain shifting within her. Lilian had her hands pressed against Aurora's lower abdomen, clearly aiding Kiran in extracting the GU source from within her. Kiran and Lilian worked well together, visibly managing to move a force slowly from Aurora's abdomen towards her mouth, hopeful that this would resolve the GU issue. Yvonne clenched her fists tightly, full of anticipation. As the goo source reached her chest, it suddenly recoiled, dropping back like a free fall. Kiran and Lilian, disappointed, quickly regrouped to attempt the extraction again. On the second attempt, the goo source recoiled again as it reached the throat. Seeing the repeated failures, Yvonne urgently reminded, "We can't keep doing this!" Continuing might kill Aurora. Kiran had already stopped, realizing that the GU source was unwilling to leave. Forcing its extraction, like plucking an unripe fruit from a tree, could prove fruitless or even harmful to both Aurora and Lilian. Kiran and Lilian released their hands, and Aurora's body seemed to stabilize somewhat, lying back on the bed. "What do we do now?" Lilian asked Kiran. "We can't force it." He didn't finish his thought, indicating a reluctance to continue with force. Yvonne, too, seemed at a loss for words. Lilian, her cheeks flushed, turned away, possibly embarrassed by the intimate contact with Aurora. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Lying on the bed, Aurora's complexion began to normalize. In a sudden turn of events, Aurora abruptly opened her eyes and sat up, startling everyone as if coming back from the dead. "This isn't good. They're using an extreme method to extract the GU source," Yvonne exclaimed. Kiran placed the needles back on Aurora, but they had no effect. Aurora's body became even more agitated, convulsing as if she could die at any moment. "Kiran, swallow it into your body first," Lilian suggested, looking at him directly. Kiran and Yvonne looked at Lilian, who snapped, "Stop dawdling." They all knew there was only one way left, for the goo source to enter Kiran's body first, then potentially into Lilian's. This meant Kiran would have to physically connect with both women, potentially leading to further intimacy. If the situation became dire, affecting the love spell in their lives, Yvonne might also need to intervene, making it a situation involving one man and 3 women. Such a scenario was embarrassing, but with the situation urgent and potentially life-threatening for Aurora, further inaction could lead to death for all 3 of them. Kiran removed the needles, embraced Aurora, and kissed her directly on the lips. Aurora's hands pushed against him, but it was an unconscious reaction, not genuine resistance, as the other party exerted force to take the GU source. Kiran moved his hands up Aurora's back, attempting to guide the goo source up into his own body. Despite several attempts, he was unsuccessful. Out of desperation, Kiran bit Aurora's tongue. "Ah!" Aurora screamed in pain as salty, warm blood mixed between their mouths. The goo source, sensing the blood, furiously rushed towards Kiran's mouth. Kiran firmly sucked on Aurora's tongue, and cold blood entered his throat, causing his body to tremble violently and turn cold. Thud! Kiran collapsed onto the bed as if frozen. Aurora also fell back, now subdued. "Lilian, hurry, Kiran can't hold on," Yvonne shouted, handing Aurora off to the healing prince, who knew he needed to leave the scene with her. Lilian then helped Kiran sit up, trying to draw the goo source out, but it was just as stubborn as before. "Kiss him," Yvonne urged urgently. Lilian's cheeks reddened, but seeing Kiran's increasingly cold and rigid body, she bent down and kissed him. Her tongue touched Kiran's, feeling like ice, making her shiver. Still, she tried to control her internal force to transfer her energy into Kiran. However, her efforts seemed futile, the goo source unresponsive. "Try Kiran's method," If that doesn't work, you might have to sleep with him, Yvonne suggested desperately. Lilian, embarrassed and angry, bit down hard on Kiran's tongue. Kiran moaned as if in his sleep, and a stream of fresh blood sprayed into Lilian's mouth. She swallowed quickly, her body shivering from the cold. Woo! It worked! Yvonne exclaimed as Kiran slowly opened his eyes. Seeing Lilian's body curl up from the cold, Kiran immediately realized what had happened. Without hesitation, he supported Lilian, channeling his internal force into her to stabilize her condition. After about 10 minutes, Lilian's complexion returned to normal, although her body remained chillingly cold. Fortunately, the Gyu source had been safely transferred, and everyone was out of immediate danger. "How is Aurora?" Kiran asked urgently as he caught his breath. "She's fine," Yvonne replied, relieving some of the tension in the room. Kiran let out a deep sigh of relief, his energy draining rapidly, causing him to collapse back onto the bed. Lilian, too, was too exhausted to move. Meanwhile, in another location, a woman dressed in black spit out a mouthful of blood and fell unconscious on the ground. Next to her lay Sawyer Sinfield and his wife, both still in a deep, unresponsive state. Back in the room, Yvonne tended to Kiran and Lilian, a hint of regret crossing her face. "It's a pity it didn't escalate further. All three of us could have ended up together," she mused, somewhat wistfully. Seeing Kiran and Lilian both unconscious, she mischievously pushed them closer together in their sleep. Lilian, still shivering from the cold, naturally clung to Kiran for warmth. Chapter. Snap! The crisp sound of a slap echoed in the room. "Ah." Kiran York gasped in shock, his eyes snapping open. He realized his hand felt unusually full. A familiar sensation, but something was off. To be precise, he sensed a murderous intent. Flustered and embarrassed, he quickly withdrew his hand, blurting out, I'm used to it." "Ah." As soon as Kiran said this, he felt an even sharper pain under his arm. He wished he could slap himself twice. Wasn't this just asking for trouble? His hand had wandered where it shouldn't have, and then he blabbered nonsense. "Get out." Lilian Yanes was furious, on the verge of exploding, raising her hand to shove Kiran to the floor. So, he was used to it. That meant he was used to Snow Xander. Thinking about how much Kiran loved Snow and how she reciprocated that love likely meant they were always close and affectionate. What did that make her then? Thinking about how Kiran had embraced her made her feel humiliated. If she had been held by anyone else in such a way, they would have been a corpse by now. "Sis, I remember I fainted. I didn't know anything." Kiran again carelessly spoke. "What do you mean? Did I climb into your bed myself?" Lilian almost burst into flames. Kiran wished he could slap himself for saying that. He quickly shook his head. "No, I mean, how did I end up unconscious?" "Don't talk if you don't know. Get out." Lilian raised her hand and pushed Kiran to the ground. Fortunately, Kiran reacted quickly enough to avoid falling. Seeing Lilian's murderous look, he turned and ran, not daring to provoke this sister any further. Lilian punched the bed in rage, furious with Kiran. He had taken her first kiss, and it was he who had initiated it. That detestable man had even touched her inappropriately. She buried her fingers in her hair, looking utterly frustrated. When Kiran emerged, he saw Yvonne Quinn smirking triumphantly at him. Instantly, he understood what had happened. He coldly glared at Yvonne. "What are you looking at? You touched her yourself, not me." Yvonne, feeling more confident now that Kiran had promised her, was not afraid. "You're trying to kill me, aren't you?" Kiran said irritably. "If you died, wouldn't I still end up a widow?" "What's in it for me?" Yvonne retorted, her face a mix of blame and resentment. Helpless, Kiran asked, "How is Aurora Sinfield? She's still unconscious, but it shouldn't be long before she wakes up." Yvonne became serious. It was really dangerous today, but luckily, Lilian agreed at the crucial moment. Otherwise, the three of us could have been in grave danger. Kiran also felt a deep sense of relief and nodded slightly. "Let's leave it at that, I'm heading back." "Where are you going?" "To Xander Corporation." "What about us?" Yvonne asked. "You." Kiran remembered his promise to marry them and felt overwhelmed. "Kiss me once, to be fair." Yvonne pouted cutely and walked towards him. Kiran showed a helpless smile. "You've got me for life, isn't that enough?" Yvonne muttered. "Why don't you touch and check for any difference?" Kiran was exasperated and quickly leaned down to kiss her. "I need to go." With that, he didn't wait for Yvonne to respond and quickly left. Yvonne didn't get angry or cling further to Kiran. After Kiran left, Yvonne returned to her room, and Lilian went back to Neptune's Cove karaoke. The three of them had managed to resolve this major issue, but the whereabouts of the Sinfield couple remained unknown. Kiran knew that Lilian's sect would investigate, so he didn't ask further. As he was about to drive away, he saw the door of the nearby car open, and Lindsay Ludwig stepped out. What are you doing? Kiran asked. Unrequited love, what else? Lindsay pouted, showing her annoyance. I'm busy. Kiran started the car to leave. Take me for a drive. Lindsay quickly got into the passenger seat. Knowing he couldn't chase her away, Kiran simply drove towards Xander Corporation. Kiran, what's your next step? Lindsay asked. I plan to build a hospital on Dragonsmount and be a doctor, Kiran said, displaying an unambitious demeanor. Lindsay scoffed. You're fooling a fool. Has there been any news from Power Hub Investment Group? Kiran turned to look at her. Lindsay was dressed in a gray dress today with a very low-cut neckline and her hair up, revealing her fair and delicate neck. Her beautiful oval face glowed with a slight blush, her straight nose and bright eyes adding to her enchanting aura. Feeling Kiran's gaze, she did not shy away, instead adjusting her posture slightly. Her legs, clad in flesh-colored stockings, shimmered enticingly as she gently swung them, capturing Kiran's attention. She flirtatiously brushed back a few strands of hair, her eyes watery and reproachful as she spoke. Power Hub is very quiet right now. The quieter they are, the more worried I get. Are you worried about yourself or the Ludwig family? Kiran asked. Lindsay's beautiful face showed a trace of annoyance, and she huffed coldly. My kindness is wasted on you. Without waiting for an answer, she turned her head, revealing her delicate collarbone even more clearly to Kiran. Don't worry about me. I'm rooted in Bayville, and all kinds of demons and monsters will come. If they dare to show up, I dare to kill them, Kiran said casually. Kiran, I really can't help worrying about you. I often have nightmares about you. Lindsay's eyes suddenly misted with tears. The usual aloofness vanished, leaving her looking like a vulnerable woman. Kiran, looking at her, suddenly didn't feel like being harsh anymore. I'm fine. Really, don't worry. I know. Lindsay straightened up, her posture graceful and dignified. Kiran looked at her furrowed brows and lovely cheeks, gently patting her stockinged leg. Don't worry. If I die, I'll take you down with me to serve the York family as a maid. You. Lindsay burst into laughter, grabbing Kiran's hand and pressing it firmly against her leg. Her face broke into a blissful smile, knowing Kiran had accepted her. True devotion opens the hardest doors, it seems. Thinking about how they had moved from being mortal enemies to this acceptance, Lindsay felt as if she were in a dream. Beep, beep. Lindsay's phone rang. She quickly picked it up, her expression changing dramatically. Chapter 709. What's wrong? Kiran York asked, noticing the change in her expression from the corner of his eye. Yasuda Corporation has already sent people to Bayville, Lindsay Ludwig said nervously. Let them come. Kiran remained calm, seemingly unconcerned. The one who came is called Ichiro Matsubara, one of the top 3 experts from Sunland. Lindsay's voice was filled with anxious warning. Seeing Lindsay's concerned expression, Kiran chuckled. There are plenty who claim to be experts. I even claim to be one myself. Be serious, Lindsay urged, growing anxious and irritated as Kiran dismissed her concerns. All right, I'm scared. Happy now? Kiran smiled. You really don't recognize kindness. Lindsay knew Kiran was just teasing her. I've got this. You don't need to worry about it, Kiran comforted her gently. We, Power Hub Investment Group, hold shares in Yasuda Corporation. If they suffer a loss here, they'll definitely make it up in other areas to compensate us, so be prepared, Lindsay reminded. That was in the past. Kiran's face darkened with a cold smile, looking ahead. From now on, whether it's Yasuda Corporation or the 4 companies behind it, if they dare to pull something like this, I'll make them pay dearly. Lindsay knew she couldn't dissuade Kiran and fell silent. When we get to Xander Corporation, you and Serena Zimmerman can discuss the specifics of the cooperation. I'll stay out of it, Kiran said. And what will you manage? Lindsay glanced at him, clearly dissatisfied. Kiran ignored her, pretending not to hear. Stinky guy. Lindsay couldn't help but mutter. If you know I stink, stay away from me, Kiran joked. No way. Lindsay boldly reached out to touch Kiran's leg. With a snap, Kiran slapped her hand away. Ah, Lindsay cried out in pain. I don't plan to be a lovebird with you in a suicide pact, Kiran glared at her. Lindsay wasn't angry. Instead, she smiled and said, Kiran, if something happens to you, I'll join you. No need. No need then, Lindsay paused, then continued. Unless I have your child, then I'll live well for our child. You're sick. Kiran was defeated by her argument, speaking irritably. Lindsay's face was filled with joyful smiles, confident that Kiran was no longer annoyed with her. As long as a man is not annoyed with a woman, she has a chance. Not truly wanting to cling to Kiran and have his child, she considered this deeply. Kiran, however, was not paying attention to her thoughts, already pondering about the so-called Ichiro Matsubara. The 2 arrived at the company, and Kiran contacted Serena to take Lindsay to discuss venture capital matters. He went to Snow Xander's office instead. Snow was pacing back and forth in her office, her pretty face filled with panic and nervousness. She was aware of today's incident involving Kiran extracting the Giyu source. Although she heard it ended up inside Lilian Yanes, she was still worried about Kiran's safety. The more she worried, the more she wanted to have Kiran's child. She was considering artificial insemination and was anxious about how to obtain the sperm. Kiran entered, saw Snow pacing in high heels, making clicking sounds, and curiously asked, "Wifey, are you exercising?" Seeing Kiran's relaxed smile, unconcerned about his own safety, Snow was annoyed and couldn't help but scold. "You stinky man." Kiran was stunned by the insult. His usually gentle wife had just called him a stinky man. "I'm tired now. Come and massage me," Snow said coldly, ignoring Kiran's reaction. Kiran thought she might be having her monthly discomfort. He glanced over her, dressed in a blue dress today, making her look tall and beautiful, with curves in all the right places. Her slender legs encased in black stockings moved back and forth, dazzlingly beautiful. The fair skin showing through the stockings stirred a strange restlessness in him. Snow noticed Kiran attracted by her beauty and was even more pleased. She lightly flipped her hair, revealing her smooth, icy arms, making her bust appear more prominent, like sudden rising hills. Kiran thought of the feeling of holding Lilian Yanes today and wished even more to hold his own wife. It felt right. "Hurry up and massage me." Snow turned and walked towards the resting room. Watching her beautiful back, Kiran touched his nose and thought to himself, "How did I end up playing the role of an eunuch?" Thinking of eunuchs, he felt it was exactly so. After all, only an eunuch could be with such a beautiful woman without engaging in conjugal acts. He followed her in and saw Snow lying on the bed looking very relaxed. However, because she was lying down, her dress had ridden up, making her buttocks protrude and the dress appear much shorter. The scenery was infinitely beautiful, tempting him to touch. Snow lay on the bed, her face flushed, breathing a bit heated. She had decided that she would obtain the sperm today and then go to the hospital. Thinking this, she was even more determined to seduce. The only thing keeping her calm was that it wasn't their first time. Remembering how tired she was each time, barely able to hold a pen, she felt somewhat irritated. Of course, the most miserable part was her sore mouth. Kiran came over and asked with a smile, "Did you not sleep well last night? Just massage me. Why so many questions?" Snow deliberately acted coquettishly. "No worries. I'm just concerned that you won't finish your work if you relax too much and fall asleep, leading to late nights and a vicious cycle." "Talk too much," Snow rebuked coquettishly. Helpless, Kiran began to massage. Snow really enjoyed it, occasionally letting out low moans that were very seductive, making Kiran's mood complex and excited, stirring various emotions. As he massaged, Snow relaxed further. She had planned to lift her dress to tempt Kiran, but soon fell asleep. After the massage, Kiran covered her with a blanket and lay beside her. "Ah!" Suddenly, Snow shouted and began to hit Kiran forcefully, Chapter 710. Kiran groggily opened his eyes and reached out to embrace Snow. "Wifey, did you have a nightmare?" Snow's face was colder than if she had been having a nightmare, staring intensely at Kiran. "You stinker." I. She began to cry. Kiran quickly sat up straight, looking at Snow. "What's wrong?" I was trying to seduce you, but how did I fall asleep?" Snow said, annoyed. Realizing she was not having a nightmare but was instead upset with herself, Kiran smiled warmly and sat up. "Seduce me for what?" he asked. "I'm worried about your safety and wanted to have a child for you." "I wanted to use the seed," Snow said, her cheeks flushed as she looked at Kiran honestly. A wave of emotion surged through Kiran, and he reached out to embrace her. "Silly girl, I'm fine. What are you afraid of?" he reassured her. "I really am worried." Snow cried, burying her face in his chest as her tears continued. Kiran gently patted her back to comfort her, but inside he was seething with anger at himself for making her worry. His thoughts naturally turned to the so-called Ichiro Matsubara. Kill! This thought was already firmly entrenched in his mind. "It's okay now," Kiran softly comforted Snow. She cried a little longer and then fell asleep again. Kiran sat up, pondered for a moment, then got out of bed and left the office, heading towards Dragonsmount. When he arrived at Dragonsmount, it was already 6 o'clock in the evening. The normally quiet Dragonsmount was now brightly lit, with the sound of machinery everywhere. Eager to quickly build the hospital, Onyx Kirkland had spared no expense in hiring workers to work in shifts. Watching the busy crowd, Kiran felt a bitter ache inside him. The path to the York family's rise was difficult, but soon his feelings turned to anger. He walked deeper into Dragonsmount. As he walked, he suddenly felt a chilly presence rushing towards him. Kiran stopped in his tracks and looked toward the presence, seeing only a shadow. "Want to make a move?" Kiran asked in an icy tone. "You're not worthy!" The figure responded, revealing it was a woman. Kiran's expression changed slightly. He had thought it was the so-called Ichiro Matsubara, but it wasn't. "Who are you?" he demanded coldly. "Kiran, give me the goo source and I promise your safety," the woman said. "The goo source?" Kiran's voice grew colder. "Do you think I would hand over my life to someone else?" "I know you wouldn't, but I just wanted to tell you it's safer with me than inside Lilian Yanes." "You're threatening me? You could say that. Then let me tell you, return the Sinfield couple, or I'll make sure you die a horrible death. You can't kill me." "Maybe not." As Kiran spoke, he moved like lightning towards the woman. However, she had already disappeared by the time he reached where she had been. Kiran was slightly stunned. He knew his own strength very well and had not expected her to be so powerful. "Who are you? No need to ask. Are you going to give it or not?" "What do you think? If not, then wait to collect Lilian Yanes' body." The woman's voice faded, and her presence disappeared. Kiran wanted to chase after her, but she was nowhere to be found. Concerned about the threat to Lilian, he hurried down the mountain, heading towards Neptune's Cove Karaoke. On the way, he called Lilian. Annoyed that Kiran had held her in a certain way earlier today, she did not answer, which only increased Kiran's anxiety, fearing something had happened. He drove like a madman to Neptune's Cove Karaoke. Upon arrival, without even turning off the car, he jumped out and ran inside, heading straight for Lilian's room. Suffering because of the GU source, Lilian was resting in bed. Kiran pushed the door open. The two looked at each other, and Lilian's anger flared. "Get out!" Kiran didn't speak, but looked around. "Is there a woman in black trying to harm you?" Seeing Kiran's tense and anxious expression, Lilian realized something was wrong and asked, "What woman in black?" "I met a woman in black at Dragonsmount. She wanted the GU source. I said no, and she told me to prepare to collect your body." Hearing this, Lilian knew Kiran was concerned about her, and her voice softened. "I haven't seen her. I'm fine." Kiran was relieved. He was about to speak when his phone rang. Seeing it was Snow's call, he quickly answered, "Wifey." Hearing this, Lilian's face changed, showing a hint of sadness. "Husband, are you in danger?" Snow asked anxiously. "I'm not! Why do you ask?" "A woman told me." "What do woman?" Kiran asked urgently. "I don't know her. I can't see her face, just someone in black." Kiran's head buzzed and a chill ran down his back. Fearing for Snow's safety, he asked, "Where are you?" "I don't know. She said you were in danger, so I followed her," Snow said, still unaware of the danger. Kiran's eyes grew cold and angry, his grip tightening on the phone. "Let that woman talk to me." "I don't know where she went," Snow said. "Make sure your phone is charged. I'm coming to find you." Kiran hung up and quickly turned to Lilian. "Sis Lilian, help me find out where Snow is." Lilian had already started making calls to track her down. Soon they located her at Dragonsmount, but the exact position was unclear. Kiran turned and rushed towards Dragonsmount. A worried Lilian followed closely behind. Thinking of the black-clad woman's strength, Kiran was concerned for Snow's safety. Just as he reached the foot of Dragonsmount and was about to go up, his car suddenly shook as if a tremendous force had hit it. He thought it was the woman in black and quickly stopped the car. Looking ahead, there was a tall man with a samurai sword. Kiran, anxious to save Snow and now confronted by this man, was frustrated and angry. "Get out of the way!" The samurai, ignored and cursed by Kiran, also became angry. "Damn it!" With a curse, he moved quickly and slashed at Kiran.